And now our next speaker comes from the country of Socrates, Plato, and Aristoteles, George Christopoulos, who studied psychology back home. Then he continued it with a funny subject I've never heard of. It's today that I read his CV, economic psychology. I know it exists, but I have never met a living economic psychologist.
There are not many.
Then he made his PhD in Cambridge in cognitive neuroscience. And what he is interested in is a great field, decision making. Decision making, which is, I think, a very, very cunning area where philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience meets. More precisely, free will. Do we have free will? Do we make our decisions? Or are there, anyway, free decisions in our brain? Or all decisions are determined by various external and internal factors and mechanisms. So I think George will talk about these things in an interesting context.
I'll try, yeah. Try once more, maybe. No, okay, I'll just I'm a trained cognitive neuroscientist, but I'm housed now in a business school. It makes things even more complicated. And actually has some effect on me. So following the talk, I give you a visual discrimination task. Spot the neuroscientist versus the business professor. Okay. I borrowed some pictures. Okay. Okay. So I guess it's very easy, right? Yeah. And this had some effect on me. So this I don't know what will happen later. Maybe, yeah, maybe with a car, I'll be richer. But actually, it was very, very interesting for me, and because I saw in the business school that they have similar questions. And when I teach in the business school, I start with this. I give them this quote and says, for us all are striving to seize in its place in the economy, if anyone does not become modified and improved in a corresponding degree with its competitors will be exterminated. And I ask, who said that? So I get these three options: a guru, management guru, an economist like Keynes, or a CEO. But who said that? It's actually Darwin. Darwin said that. And if you actually see the three pillars of Darwin's theory, reproductive success, battle for survival, new species, and you go and get Adam Smith, which is for economics what Darwin is, reproductive success corresponds to profit, battle for survival, economic competition, new species, division of labor. It's quite outstanding. But why? Well, because both people have to solve similar problems. Either if you are an economic agent or an organism, you have to solve the same problem. The same problem is that you have to make choices and decisions. That's the main problem. And what's the main problem with decisions? And actually, this fits very well with the previous speech, is uncertainty. So the major problem that the human brain, actually any brain, has to solve is how to deal with uncertainty. Even the visual system, the main problem that has to solve is how to reduce uncertainty. So we try to approach this from the economic point of view. So we want to see how the human brain deals with uncertainty. This one, okay. But we know that decision making is quite important in a very, in many different psychiatric or other diseases. And many of them seem to be mediated by malfunctioning of dopamine. So why is dopamine so important? I will come back to you, but I just want to emphasize that we're very much interested in dopamine. And actually, many psychiatric drugs actually target dopamine. So In the same way that visual neuroscientists, when they try to understand how the brain understands the visual world, we assume that the brain needs first to represent the decision environment. One difference with the visual problems is that when we make decisions, especially with reward, we do not have receptors. There are no receptors for reward. Okay, whereas for the visual problems, we have receptors in the eyes, for the tongue, but when we try to understand, for instance, uncertainty or reward, there are no receptors on our brain, on our body. Have to go into the brain. Now, if you examine, this is Harry Markowitz. He has a Nobel Prize in economics, and what he said, he suggested a mean variance approach that explains how stocks move, to put it simply. And to simplify even more, what he said is that to understand an uncertain event, you need two numbers. You need the mean and the variance. Okay, this is a theoretical approach, but we wanted to examine, does the brain represent these two numbers separately? So in neuroeconomics, we use very simple paradigms. We usually ask subjects to choose between, let's say, 38 pounds for sure, or a gamble that would give them either 10 or 90 with equal probability. And surprisingly, these simple problems can enlighten us on how the human brain represents decisions. So we found out, without going into many details, that ventral striatum, which is dopaminergic, represents the expected value or the value of a choice. Whereas uncertainty is represented in another area called anterior cingulate. So it looks like the brain can separate mean and variance, at least structurally. Of course, mean and variance is not enough because there are individual differences. So there is another third component, risk aversion. And there are actually individual and even cultural differences of how much people like risk. So we found out that there is a third area, right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, that encodes risk aversion. The higher the activity in dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the more risk averse our subjects were. We went even further. We went to see, can I take the brain signals for each of these areas, combine them mathematically in the same way that Markowitz will have predicted, and predict the choice of the subject just by looking at the brain, on a trial-by-trial basis. And we did very well. So this is the ROC, and we could predict over 70% if we combine mathematically the three signals. So it means that the information is there in these three areas. So you can predict the choice. With some simple logistic regression, we found that right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, as I told you before, the more activation, the more risk averse you are. And there are some other experiments that have shown that with other methods. So you can apply TMS, and this might sound horrible, but it's not so as bad as it sounds. You can apply TMS, you can shut down a brain area for a while, hopefully, and you can see the effect. So if you shut down the same area, you can decrease the risk aversion. So this coincides with what we found. There are some other experiments on that. We also talk about probabilities. So imagine you have this problem. You have to submit, this is an everyday problem, actually. Do you devote the rest of the day to increase the probability from 85 to 90%, or from 25 to 30%? Or you just give up, okay. But you have these two options. So notice that the increase in probability is 5%. It's the same. But people usually have preferences. So this has been found by Daniel Kahneman, another economist, psychologist who won the Nobel Prize. He said that people distort the probabilities. So to come back, when you tell the people that 35% of the faces will be male, you don't know if they actually represent this as a 35% in the brain. But you could actually elicit their distortion. So this is the real probability. This is what they believe. And you can find a lot of individual differences. This is a perfect calibration. And we found out, we first checked the ventral stratum to see how does it respond to probabilities. And we found out that, surprisingly, ventral stratum has almost perfect calibration of probabilities. It can very almost linearly represent probabilities. So the question is, where does the distortion of probabilities happen? Again, it's prefrontal cortex. So this area correlated to individual differences in distortion of probabilities. Okay, both of them talk about adaptation. So organisms and organizations and companies need to adapt and change. But how does this happen? You can go back to Pavlov, and the dog can learn slowly to associate the ring of the bell with the food. How does this computationally happen? Well, I'm lucky I'm coming after you. You explained already prediction error. So prediction error is what you expect to find and minus what you actually found. And this is updated, and this helps organisms to learn. So to give you an example, you have this agent here, and it encounters this object, which has no meaning, and the value is 0. Okay. So now, randomly, the monkey tastes this. And, okay, it's nice. I get 1. So it was expecting 0. It got 1. That's a positive prediction error. A positive prediction error means is used for the next encounter with this can. So now the can has a better value, it's 0.2. Then you can try again. Let's say it's not as nice in the second trial. Again, you still get a prediction error. And slowly, slowly, the monkey might learn that the can predict something nice. This is a very nice example of successful neuroscience exercise, because we have the computations, we have the psychological interpretation, and we also have the neuronal representation. So one of the major discoveries for neuroscience is the discovery by Schultz, who actually will be visiting in October, that dopamine neurons actually represent prediction errors. So he had monkeys. Here is a reward delivered. Unexpectedly, you see neurons firing. Now here he had, let's say, a bell predicting a reward. After a while, the monkey learns that the bell will predict the reward. You see that the dopamine neurons fire on the bell, but do not fire on reward. So the monkey has learned that this is rewarding. In the same way that we learn that money, when you see money, you get excited. But you cannot eat the money, right? So, and even more impressively, if you have this, the bell and there is no reward delivered, you see a suppression, like a negative prediction error. So in humans, we study this like that. You have subjects choose between 2 random stimuli, and they choose one, and then they receive a reward. But what they do not know is that one stimulus is better than the other. This stimulus, most of the time, will give $70 with probability 80%, whereas sometimes minus 70. And this is the opposite. So after a while, they learn that this is a better stimulus, that they should choose more. And this has been used very successfully for humans. So Pesilion et al. Showed that if you administer haloperidol that decreases dopamine, you can decrease the learning. So this is how fast they learn. And whereas when you deliver L-DOPA to humans again, you increase dopamine, learning increases, it goes faster. And this actually also, if you do computational analysis, you can see that ventral stratum represents these computations. Now, the question I posed in my postdoc, during my postdoc is, are these decision-making systems used during social interactions? Or are there different systems? There was some evidence, and actually this theory, the social arms race, that says it goes even further. He says that we are humans and we are more clever than other animals exactly because we had to face this social world. Because we have to face all these social problems. So, yeah, I'll skip this, but there is some evidence that shows that prediction error can happen when you try to trust somebody else, when you play a kind of a game that you invest money to somebody else and then you don't receive the, what you were expecting to receive, then you see some prediction errors again. How about how money are distributed between humans? So both of them talked about competition. Adam Smith talked about the invisible hand, and Darwin about survival of the fittest. But what people don't know is that both of them also, in other books, talked about the importance of cooperation. So even Adam Smith, he said that it's important that society is based on cooperation, even the economy. So we want to see how this happens in the human brain. So actually this was accepted like 2 weeks ago. So this you can again represent with a very simple allocations, okay? So I ask you, do you prefer for yourself $70 and another person that you do not know $70? Do you prefer for yourself 100 or 0, and 0 for the other person, or even worse, 70 for yourself and the other person minus 70? So notice that this person, which we call competitive, is actually willing to receive less money than here, provided that he increases the distance with the other person. So this person actually exists, and fortunately or not, so you can actually represent them in a two-dimensional axis. So this is how much I get, this is how much the other person gets, and you have these 3 dimensions. So cooperative, individualistic, competitive, and you have some rare examples here. So we did this experiment to identify, and this is what we found. So we found most of people are, at least in our sample, okay, so it's not representative sample, were individualists. But there were a lot of that were cooperative and a lot that were competitive. I have to say this was done in Texas. Okay. Right, yeah, so in the second part of the experiment, we want to see how people learn about these outcomes. So we adapted this paradigm. Again, you choose between 2 stimuli that are probabilistic, but now what you choose also has an impact on the other person. So that means that you produce prediction errors not only for what you get, but you also produce prediction error for what the other person gets. So you need to monitor 2 prediction errors. The question is this the same area that does this? Well, we found no. Ventral striatum still controls the self-prediction error, whereas medial prefrontal cortex controls the other prediction error. These are 4 different experiments. And because it is very clear, the dissociation. And actually, this activity is mediated by your social value orientation, meaning whether you are competitive or cooperative. Okay? So that means you can find in the human brain how social preferences are represented. And this is quite exciting because you can talk even for pathological issues now. Yesterday you talked about oxytocin, so I have a result here. Actually, I added for you. So oxytocin, we know, will facilitate lactating, lowers anxiety, increases generosity, et cetera, et cetera. So we did this experiment, the same experiment. So this is placebo. People that were beforehand classified as competitive, individual, and cooperative. So competitive people didn't choose the cooperative stimulus much. This was around 50%. These people choose the cooperative stimulus a lot. Now, we administer oxytocin to these people. What would happen? all of them become individualists. They only care for themselves. My hypothesis was that everyone would become cooperative based on the previous literature. Everyone would become cooperative, but no. I still haven't interpreted this result, but it's quite interesting. And I think oxytocin is not just about being good. Maybe it's just being good to your own team. Now, social risks. So people that were invited in this conference, they talked a lot with Karen Chang, which I couldn't find her pick, but she is the secretary of Yang. Okay? And if she was there, we could thank her. But anyway, so if you ask Karen, every day she starts her work, and she has to face some risk. Some risk, of course, is weather, especially in Singapore. Suddenly it might rain. And of course, this is not clear, but there's a guide to common insects in the parks and gardens of Singapore. And yes, you can have, I think the size is some of them could be actual size, yeah. But Karen has to face other risks now, okay? Namely, and that's how I will never be invited again. But these are two different types of risks. These are risks by nature. These are risks by the social world. Does the human brain represent the risks in the same way? So we did an experiment. It's very simple again. In one condition, they have to choose between keeping $15 or investing in a stock. And what we show them is the outcome, the history of the stock. So most of the time, you can win, and sometimes you lose. In another condition, we tell them, okay, keep $15, or you can invest to another person, and this person can reciprocate to you. But we show the history. So most of the times, this person, in other occasions, he reciprocated. Sometimes he did not. But the probabilistic, the stochastic environment is exactly the same. It's only the source of uncertainty that is different. You should expect that they should behave the same, because the information given is the same. But actually, we found two groups. So one group preferred to invest in stocks instead of humans. The other group preferred to invest in humans instead of stocks. Psychologically, we interpret this. The reason you prefer to invest in stocks is because there is some what we call betrayal aversion. So the cost of losing is not only the money that you lose, but it's also the psychological cost that you are betrayed. But why these people will prefer to invest in humans? Well, because they have altruistic preferences. They say, even if I invest in another person, and if he doesn't reciprocate, anyway, the money will go back to another person. Nevertheless, we found that both of these signals were mediated by striatum. So dopamine, I mean, that's a generalization, but striatum will signal what you prefer. Higher activity towards when you receive a social reward. If you don't like these outcomes, you have higher activity by striatum, and the opposite. And all these very simple examples actually have invaded now computational psychiatry. So we can understand social interactions by using computational approaches with these simple games. Okay. Now some more studies that are more closer to what we discussed. I'm going to talk about cultural mixing, emotions, and the project we have now on megacities. Okay. Cultural mixing is Yingyi and Bobby there. And the idea came from the, no, let's start first about disgust. Okay. And maybe the philosopher can say something, but okay, you have this two, this is like your shoulder, this is a pizza. Okay, this is nice. This is not nice, but it's far away, okay? It's okay. Your pizza is here and the insect is there. You're not very much discussed. But then, okay, Now it becomes disgusting. So it is not this that it is disgusting on itself. It's the mixing that it is disgusting. We want to test this again. Does this mechanism is used in social environments? This is always the question we try to answer. And the idea came from here. So this is Starbucks coffee, and it's very successful in China. They're doing very well. Very well. Actually, they have integrated a little bit. And OK, Chinese are happy with this until this happened. Starbucks inside the Forbidden City. There was almost a war on this, OK? This, something they didn't like. People felt that they were like invaded. And OK, as you said, I had another example. OK, I'm from Greece. And this is Parthenon. And other people, not Greeks, have said that this is probably one of the most perfect buildings built ever. And it's very beautiful. And Freud went there and almost fainted. But maybe not beautiful enough for an American marketing manager, because he thought of this. So this is a real Coca-Cola advertisement that was very quickly retracted, of course. And when it was shown in Greece, again, it was the same feeling of being invaded. So we wanted to test this, and we want to test cultural mixing as contamination. Is it contamination that subserves these cultural mixing emotions? So we wanted to test this in the States, and you have this stimulus, OK? You're pure American, the pizza, and pure Chinese. OK, don't be insulted, but OK, the insects, OK? They're side by side. OK, they're nice. OK, this is nice. Then we put them side by side. OK, you can accept that. And then we put them on top. So you have now General Mao, United We Win. So, and gets even worse. Yes. Here, the American Revolution with the Red Book. And we plan to do this in Virginia, which, you know, OK. You still see Confederation flags when you go to Virginia. So actually, we haven't gone through the IRB yet. And but we did an online experiment. So this is like the pure contamination images of the pizza, you know. But if you go and read the methods, they say, OK, I forgot this, or they have only 15 East Asians. But anyway, all of them were Chinese. And the most important is that they lived in the Western country only 5.2 months. I don't think that's enough to distance yourself from China and learn the emotional or facial patterns in the new culture. So we want to do this formally, and I think this is a very good place to do that. Finally, this is a big project we start. This is the map of what we call mega cities. Singapore is not a mega city. So you talk of over 10 million people. But OK, Singapore feels like a mega city sometimes. And so population increases. And this is a major problem. And actually, yesterday you talked about environment. I wanted to expand the idea of environment. And we want to test how we can improve environment and how environment can impact psychological and behavioral processes. So the major problem for engineers is space. So in Singapore, there are 3 solutions. First, you expand. OK, so here we have reclaimed land a lot. Then you can go up. You build higher and higher and higher. But the last solution is you go down. So actually, this is a science city that is going to be built in the US. Question is that we want to answer is, can people work there? Can people work underground? Is it healthy for them? Are they going to be productive? And this can be expanded generally, how people live and perform in different and strange spaces, like confined space, offshore platforms, even Arctic regions. So we want to approach this from integrated viewpoint. We want to have engineering, we have health, we have psychology. I don't know, we have time. I just want to see. It's very, because one of the purposes we gathered here is to decide how we're going to do the human cognitive cognition program, or how we call it. So I had some ideas. I've been 3 years in the Singaporean ecosystem. There are some ideas. One idea is we could do basic science. I think that's difficult because there's strong competition, okay? And molecular approaches can also take a big part of the pie. Clinical also we can do, but from my experience, we have a lot of problems when we conduct clinicians. They are not very much involved. One focus would be Southeast Asia. Yes, that could be an opportunity. I think we do not know, for instance, how psychiatric diseases are expressed in Southeast Asia. This is a big unknown, and I think we can drive this. My suggestion is to go for real-world problems for the positive side of psychology. So instead of looking at what happens with people that have schizophrenia, depression, we should look at people that are successful, are happier, perform better. Instead of looking at unsuccessful aging, we should look at successful aging and target this. So I think we should target questions that the society now asks us to ask. So the society now needs answers. Like they ask, how can I age well? How should I build my cities? Can we even help fight poverty? I know that this is ambitious, but we should go for something ambitious. And this is something that has not been answered. So, yeah, these are my thoughts, and it's for discussion, of course. And with that, yeah, I finished my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Very challenging views, and I think quite some food for further discussions.
Okay.
So, questions? Philosophy. No, not yet. Yes, visual neuroscience. Yes.
This is not related to visual. How do you manipulate the dopamine in that experiment you mentioned?
Oh, we don't measure dopamine. We just measure striatum responses.
Oh, so
but we assume that they are dopaminergic.
do they manipulate the level of dopamine? Like dopamine level goes up, then what the
in this
decision?
one?
Yeah.
This is not my experiments, Matthias.
Oh.
You mean with L-Dopa?
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't measure it actually.
Oh, so how did they
but we know
change the level of dopamine?
We know, but by administering
Yeah.
L-Dopa, dopamine levels increase,
Mhm.
haloperidol decreases. So
Oh.
maybe you know better. Yeah. But there are previous results that show that, yeah. But I don't think they actually measure dopamine.
Oh, I
They
see.
measure the striatal response.
Yeah.
It's just
Did the subject do any risk-reward analysis, like high risk relate to high reward, and for those subjects?
So we formally separate risk and reward. You cannot combine them.
Yeah.
So usually high risk comes with high reward.
Yeah,
So
just
you
like
need to-
gambling.
Yes, you need to compensate between these two, and that's actually what risk preferences are. So when
Yes.
we measure risk aversion, it's how humans compensate the risk and the reward. Yeah.
So for those experiments, it seems to me most of them assume the subjects are rational. So, you know, they already, they're very rational. Their decision is based on a clear computation or analysis. What if anybody study irrational decision, like when they got into some emotional influence on their decisions, and then basically it doesn't follow any rule?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, we need to define what rational and irrational is. irrational means that when you violate some basic principle of or axiom of logic, like
depression.
okay, at least that's what economists will say. I said it on purpose. But at least, for instance, you can say rationality is when you violate transitivity.
Yeah.
Transitivity means I like A over B and B over C, and then suddenly you like C over A.
Right.
If you do that, you violate rationality.
What's the reason of that?
Well, people do that. Yeah, that's a big debate. We don't know exactly why they do that. But they say that there's some neuroimaging results that suggest that has to do with some emotions that are attached to different decisions. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question. Maybe could you come up with the final slide with all the list of questions?
Oh,
Yeah.
at the end, you mean?
Yeah, final.
Yeah. Oops.
I must have missed something because there's something strange. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Use neuroscience to answer such questions as, and we get a whole bunch of questions. To begin with, why is the ethical left out?
Oh.
And second, well, you could have, okay.
Yeah.
You could include it. Is that what you
Oh,
said?
yes, certainly. And
Woo.
I think it's implicitly everywhere.
But in what sense is the word used neuroscience here used?
Oh, okay. Okay, maybe rephrase this. How could neuroscience inform us on this? Is it better?
I'm afraid not, but okay. I mean, yeah, it's better, it's
Yeah,
better understandable, but it's really, it baffles me a bit.
In what?
In certain, I mean, when talking about the ethical, right?
Right.
What does this go to?
Well, now, okay, ethical you mean why, how, whether
The
we
good
can
and the
use-
bad and the ugly.
Yeah, yeah.
No, no.
Whether we can use neuroscience to understand this, whether we are allowed to do
Yeah.
Yes. That's a big question, even political, I would say. But I think we should. If we have a knowledge, we should use it. In the same way
Oh.
with nuclear physics, correct?
No, what, well,
Nuclear physics. Should we use it or not?
woo. Sorry?
Nuclear physics.
Yes.
Should we use them to build a bomb?
So okay, then for instance, it is allowed then to clone people.
Yeah,
Yo.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't have, I'm just asking.
Okay, so
It's a question, it's not an
I
answer.
mean,
I just
I think no, it's a very important question, and I cannot answer. I mean, if you go to
Well, I have to think about it, but on the, at first sight, something strange for me in any case. Because for one thing, ethics is about what should be, and neuroscience is about what is. No. Aha. It is also about what should be? Excuse me?
Who decides what should be? It is our brain. No?
Okay. Yeah.
Who is making the ethical decision? Ourselves. And what are the ethical committee doing? Yeah, they try to make decisions.
Yeah.
And the decisions are taken by the brain of the people together. I don't want to say that they are decisions taken exclusively by, and that the neuroscience is going to give a complete explanation of everything. I am not saying that.
No.
But you should use, to my opinion, at least.
And well, okay.
can I reverse
There is a
the-
good use and a bad use probably of
Yeah.
this, or it's only used.
Of everything.
Well, yeah. But
You see,
how is it going?
of human
Who's
knowledge
going
in
to
general.
decide there?
Well,
Some
political?
Us.
We have to decide.
Political.
It's political.
I mean,
Well,
can you use?
I think the scientists are better positioned than the politicians. They should inform the politicians.
I think the debate is open.
if I may join in this debate. It seems to me that this issue of whether to do or not to do has got to do with value systems, which is to me outside of this domain.
Yes.
But anyway, I want to say that I really like your suggestion here. One of the things that got me thinking was your example of this experiment involving disgust.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And talk about real-world problems. I was thinking of the issue that we all are facing, this issue of harmony at a societal level. It seems to me that this human reaction of disgust has a part to play in cases of disharmony. Correct. To put it in a more extreme manner. Yes. And so I'm interested to know, from neuroscience angle, is there some ways where we can manipulate the human response so that we tone down that disgust and foster more harmony?
Yes. That's a very good question. First of all, cultural mixing or any kind of mixing could be also positive, as we know. For instance, it reinforces creativity. We become more creative when we encounter different ideas. The other way, I think we can find factors that increase this reaction and try to stop them. So, for instance, we know that higher cognitive load might promote such reactions. That means if you are tired, if you work a lot, then that's the point that these reactions will come up. It's a general inhibition problem. So maybe we need to suppress such factors that might increase such reactions, and maybe find factors that increase the other reactions.
But is it just the clash itself? Like for example, the one that you mentioned, the Western and the Eastern cultures, putting them together. Again, the difference in reaction could stem from values, could stem from differences in outlook. So, for example, the artwork that Yingi did, showed us. To some, this is creative. This is expression of the self. But to others, this is sacrilegious. Right. And so the difference seems to me to stem from something else, which has got to do with your outlook. Which also then made me think about the earlier issue of the linguistic relativity, whether we could perhaps influence that response by coming up with other words that has a different connotation, a different implied value systems that would change the way we see the world.
I agree, and I think this is something not very well researched. Like, how can we change and maybe Josh can say something about it, but yeah, how we can use language to prime the way we interpret the phenomenon. And also, you said that different people might have different approach to the stimuli. Actually, I would say that even the same person could have different approach on different cases.
Yeah.
Okay? When he's tired, maybe he has this approach. When he's, for instance, we know that during financial scarcity or when we have financial problems, the levels of ethnocentrism or this kind, like we don't want foreigners, go up. That might have to do with how the brain interprets how we deliver resources. So we need to understand the psychological mechanisms behind it. I think it's an open field. Yeah.
Actually, I had a similar question, which is about maybe how do you disentangle the content behind these symbols from the association with an outgroup in terms of thinking about the cultural mixing. And I think this may be one of the issues that you may need to tease apart and maybe even see whether the neuroscience may help about this. Because when I see the picture of the Red Guards, but with Americans there, I see the potential for people to see it as being more about ideological clashes. So whether it's about values or something, there is an actual content component. And you can even make the same argument about the Starbucks, which is the idea is that the Starbucks actually is a particular symbol of something that represents our global capitalism. with America as being the leader of global capitalism that is now intruding on our space. And so I think it's to really get into the nuances of this with cultural mixing. You may need to disentangle what's the content of the cultural mixing, and what is the association that they actually think that, do they think it's representative of that other demarcated population, that, you know, it's Chinese or it's American.
Culture is values at the end.
No, I mean, well, I guess it's a big question. Yeah, it's values, it's beliefs, it's knowledge. Yeah, it's. But the main thing is that there is a distinction between the content of the symbols and its association. So I think that's why you would find some difference. Like, I'll give you a good example. There's been discussion in the U.S. about, you know, when they've had pictures of a white woman with yoga outfit, for some reason they don't think it's an issue at all. But then they've said that in terms of reactions from outside. But then I heard that when it's a white woman with a belly dancing outfit, then they say, oh, this is a problem. And so is it really a cultural mixing problem, or is it some association of Orientalism, and so there's again this idea that there's already these ideas that they have in their mind.
I think it's values.
Yeah.
Probably you want to say.
Yeah, I think those are really good questions, but I think that those are also a lot of moderating factors, because part of it could be the distance between the cultures, because we chose China and the US, given that China is quite culturally distant from the US, as opposed to, say, for instance, if we looked at mixing between France and US, for instance. And so that could be one potential moderator that, as you say, maybe there's something that seems much more exotic or much more foreign about a belly dancing outfit compared to a yoga outfit, per se. But we also have some stimuli there that some of them have an ideological flavor, like, for instance, as you mentioned about like the American Revolution, drawing parallels with the Chinese Cultural Revolution through those mixed images. But we also have some images that are not very ideological. It's just, for instance, we have one stimuli that's you see Chinese dumplings and you see a bowl of macaroni and cheese, and you either see them side by side or you see the macaroni and cheese mixed together with the Chinese dumplings. And that also still elicits disgust as well. And so we have some different levels of like how ideological or politically incorrect, or but they show similar results in how people respond to them. So there seems to be this basic element of I just don't like the fact that these two things are mixed together. And of course, if there's like an ideology behind it, that probably strengthens the dislike even more.
So I think, it's true there are, in-group, out-group elements in this. But we do it step by step. So another sample that we will run actually is next week. We will have a large group of Filipino undergraduate students. So we will be presenting this too. So that would be like out-group mixing. Yeah, so we'll see, yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I'd like to know whether dopamine is the best or good chemical materials to conduct research on decision making from neuroscience perspective.
So dopamine is
good chemical material or the best.
what do you mean good? What do you mean good?
Good means because you use a dopamine
Yes.
to conduct research on decision making.
Yeah.
Then, for example, you made a similar suggestion on that slide. Then, for example, to know how neuroscience contribute those research agenda, then is dopamine a good material to focus on or examine?
Yes. So dopamine seems to mediate a lot of decision-making processes, especially learning. So how you do valuation and learning. So we know that dopamine, or at least dopaminergic striatal responses, can respond to money, can respond to food, can respond even to art. You see nice art, you can see dopamine responding, even nice cars. So I think it's a very important neurotransmitter. But also there are other neurotransmitters, like for instance serotonin, that seems to mediate uncertainty. And of course it's a big system. I mean, you have hormones that also can play a role. But again, we do not know a lot. Even for dopamine, we do not know a lot of exactly what it does.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to come back to the use of the word value that you have been constantly using, and which has created a debate. And I think there are good reasons why there should be a debate about it, because there are so different meanings of the word value that I think one interesting debate would be to try to separate the different meanings of the word value, because there is, of course, the one which is from the free enterprise, I would say free market, capitalist system, whatever you like to, which is yours, after all. All your talk is based on that. So there is already, if I may say, a political choice at this level in this meaning of value, because it is something which give some money, you can get a news and so on. So that's one thing. Now there is also the extreme opposite, what we may call an ethical value. And I discussed that at the end of my presentation. And now is the question, are there ethical universal value? And I mentioned the Declaration of Human Rights. And this is, I think, a very interesting issue where, to my opinion, the neuroscience have something to say there, because they are, I believe, at least, or I think, if I not believe, I think that the neuroscience tell us that there are common features between the different human brains which may exist, that there are differences between human brains, but there are also a lot of convergence and similarities from which some ethical value may emerge according to the golden rule I just mentioned, which exists in all civilizations. Now, there is another aspect which was mentioned, which is depending on, so I would not use the word culture because it's too general, but to ethnicity, to national belonging, and other aspects like that. And I think in this respect, Martha Nussbaum and many other philosophers have taken a position that there is no ethical value whether you are European or Japanese or American. It's neutral. You know, why should there be any kind of value in? Would you classify the societies and the civilization according to a system of value? That's Lévi-Strauss has discussed that for a long time, and we should remember all this. So when has to debate about East, West, or whatever diversity, cultural diversity, one should be aware of at least these three meanings I distinguished, but there are many other possibly. And in particular, the notion of value in a capitalist system may be completely in contradiction with a universal ethical value.
Yep.
And it has shown that, because in the present free enterprise system, the poverty is increasing more and more, while the rich become richer. So it means that the whole system is not following universal ethical rule of equality and so on and so forth. Maybe we should find a third system, but I don't know if it's the place there. But I would be interested to to have your reaction about that. In particular, the two aspects of the word meaning value I try to.
So, yeah, we use, of course, we start with basic. We start with money, which is the most easy way. But there are some studies now that show, for instance, that the human brain or humans are willing to forego money to provide charity, for instance, or to be good to somebody else. And you can see even striatal responses to charitable donations. That means that we try also to understand how the human brain reacts to non-monetary rewards, even when these non-monetary rewards are in the opposite of what capitalism will predict.
Yes, but monetary reward is an example of reward which is used to study the human brain. Damasio and others and yourself have been using that, but I think it does mean that that money is the reward for human beings.
No.
Okay, but this is something which should emphasize, because I think in the discussion there was a difficulty due to that,
Right, I see.
And I would even say that money is not, to my opinion, an ethical value, but.
Well, okay. Well,
no, but you may have a different opinion.
No. What I want to say is that we know that money is the driving force, right?
Well, it's a driving force in a type of society, and there are societies which don't have money, and which are existing very well.
Maybe some, but what I want to say is that neuroscience appreciates that. So there are studies now that shows that there are reward-like responses to non-monetary.
Yes, hopefully,
There are responses to art, there are responses to charity, there are responses to being fair.
Yes,
there are responses to fairness.
That's a
and there are
good
even
one.
responses to morals, like you refer to the golden rule.
Yes.
There are studies that so they ask people, shall we kill one person to save 5
Yes, I know this is a classical paradigm.
So there are neuroimaging studies on that.
And if you take alcohol, then you have a change in the.
Or if you have a prefrontal lesion, then it becomes.
Gary's the next one.
So my point is a totally different one. So your list could be taken as an expression of utilitarianism. Meaning that this is usually something that if we will answer these questions affirmative, as a neuroscientist, politicians will give us money, right?
Not.
Yeah, well, I'm not
but
really.
Agree,
I'm not really finished, but assumption. But we do not really understand the brain yet. Now, there is good psychology, good psychophysics, plus neuroimaging, and it tells us a little bit about where things might happen, but we do not understand how the brain works. And so there is a danger that if we engaged into answering each of these questions, we will not get to the ultimate scientific goal of understanding how the brain works, right? And I don't think we at this point can advise neither politicians or how to form the society in any way, because we do understand too little. So the point is that should we support the increase of knowledge about the brain, or should we try to answer these questions?
Can I answer? Do you agree that these questions have scientific value as well? Because the main complaint that I actually get from the business school is getting people making decision making in the lab has nothing to do with real life. So answering questions in more applied settings, in real life settings, has scientific value. I'm not doing it for money. And I also disagree. The ultimate target is not to understand the brain. The ultimate target is to help humanity. That's the ultimate target. We want to understand the brain to help humans. Correct? That's what. So it's not purely utilitarian.
Opinion, but I think that's a logical mistake, namely that we are not in the position to answer these questions now, and it is not sure that if we try, that the answers we come up with is actually the true answers, because we don't know.
I agree, but I think we should try. Because it's time to get out of the lab. It's time to get out of the lab. Yeah, exactly.
Jula, next question.
No, it's actually just a comment, not as exciting as what you guys got into now. Is that I don't know if you know this experiment that it's actually a side effect was an experiment. What is reward? Macaque monkeys sitting in the cages, and they were given two choices for two rewards. One reward was food, the other was playing a video game, and the other was playing another game. And most of the monkeys chose, instead of getting food, playing another time. So what is reward? Just that
novelty seeking.
Exactly. So what is reward? It depends. They were super bored. They needed some input. Therefore, they chose the input as a
Actually,
reward.
there was an experiment in humans that they put them in recently. They put them in the room, and they told them, okay, just sit in the room and do nothing. And people were willing to electrocute themselves just to make the time interesting.
Now, George, I wanted to ask a question about that, because we know very clearly that this reward, let's say, expectation, is different from population to population. Mm-hmm. And we know that gambling is a major thing to provoke a reward in the brain. Right. But of course, there is a very well-known study. There is a literature on it, starting with Sabina Papata's famous PET study, that there are so-called born gamblers, and there are people who are not gambler types.
Right.
So the gamblers are, funnily enough, are always going on with gambling if they win, because now I am in a good way to win more and more and more. Or if they lose, because now I have lost, but the next one I will regain everything and regain everything and so on. And then the study shows, the first PET study showed a number of studies, that in these so-called gambler types, there is dopamine release in the putamen, and of course the accumbens, but strangely enough, not exactly in the same position during losing and winning.
That's interesting.
But in the non-gambler types, there is always in the same position. So it means there is probably a pathological circuit somewhere in the putamen pallidum accumbens level.
Right.
And we know, this is a part, we know that, for instance, in China or in Singapore, the gambler times are more common than in other countries.
Genetics also different.
There must be a genetics behind it. Do we know anything about it? Do you want to investigate this sort of ethnicity-based difference in gambling times or gamblers and non-gamblers?
There are some studies that show that genetic distribution in Asia is a little bit different, that might contribute to the increased gambling. And I think that's an interesting question that we could ask. I mean, going back to what we discussed, since we advise on gambling, on schizophrenia, depression, why we cannot advise on normal people?
I prefer you do the advising, and I am not in the position to do so now, okay? So depending on how much you think you really know.
I mean, we advise people to get drugs. We give people drugs. Why we cannot advise how to build the environment? It's much less impactful.
I think we can.
No.
I think we can go on with all these things.
Forever,
Any further questions? Yes.
I think in medical sciences, we have ethical committees.
Yeah, always. Yeah.
And I think they play a useful role to some extent. In physics, it does not exist. Does it exist in economics?
We do experiments in humans, yes.
Yes, but in general, for the whole discipline.
I don't know about macroeconomics.
There are some ethical rules which
some.
are being followed by bankers and traders and so on and so forth. But
you mean not in science? You mean in
real world economics.
They have their own ethics. Yeah, they have, but they don't follow them.
Sort of. I think we have to have a little coffee now. After all these difficult things, applaud to George. And we meet here, say we must have at least 20 minutes, so a little bit over 30, 35 we meet here again, okay?